Level up your LA Kings experience with the new Vivid Seats Elite Seats. All the on-ice Kings action with even more exclusive access. Enjoy great seats to the game along with premier dining inside the Lexus Club with all-you-can-eat food and non-alcoholic beverages. Plus, get a free Team LA Kings item and parking with your purchase. Score your Vivid Seats Elite Seats tickets today and earn rewards on each purchase from the only ticket company that rewards you for buying. Experience it live with Vivid Seats, the official partner of the LA Kings.
You're listening to an LA Kings podcast. For more episodes of this and every other Kings program, visit lakings.com/podcast.
Ritchie over the line to Krejci, in front to Studnicka, he scores! Jack Studnicka!
You're listening to All the Kings Men, the official podcast of the LA Kings.
Waits, holds, goes across, and the shot by Gawdin, and he scores! Glen Gawdin!
Now, here's your host, Jesse Cohen.
Welcome back, Kings fans. I'm Jesse Cohen. This is All the Kings Men. We're wrapping up our series of acquisition evaluations, and today we're focusing on a trio of depth forwards signed on July 1st, Jack Studnicka, Glen Gawdin, and Jeff Malott. Joining me today, Sheng Peng from San Jose Hockey Now, NBC Sharks, and the San Jose Hockey Now podcast. You can follow him at Sheng_Peng on Twitter. How are you doing today, Sheng?
Very good. How's it going, man?
Good, thank you. We're here today to talk about Jack Studnicka, and you are the sort of perfect person to talk to about this because you cover not only the Sharks, but also the Barracuda. And for those who don't know, the Sharks and Barracuda play their games in the same building up there in San Jose. A building.
Oh, not anymore, actually.
Oh, is that? No, okay. Well, I take it back.
Yeah, the Sharks play at SAP Center, and the Barracuda actually have a brand new building, a couple of years old, TXU Arena, 4,000-seat arena. Very nice arena, actually. You should come visit.
All right. Well, that probably won't happen, but so Jack Studnicka signed by the LA Kings. Unclear how much time he'll spend in LA versus Ontario, but you should be familiar with him. So what kind of player is Jack Studnicka?
I think Jack Studnicka is trying to actually still figure out his game. Jack is 25. He was a 2017 second-round pick by the Boston Bruins. He was drafted sort of as a playmaking guy, a guy that might put up points if he reached his potential at the AHL level, but that hasn't really happened at the AHL level. And so he's a guy that, at least last season, the Sharks wanted him to kind of play a harder, more defensive-edged game. Not that he was defensively irresponsible, but they want him to be more of a fourth-line center type. I think if you're thinking of an example on the Sharks, Nico Sturm is kind of a good model for maybe what they wanted him to go toward. And he wasn't quite able to achieve that by the end of his tenure with the Sharks and Barracuda. Otherwise, they would have re-signed him. It's not like he was very expensive, but he's still young. And he did realize that in season, and that's something that he had to do. Last year, he was waived by the Vancouver Canucks and eventually traded to the Sharks for not a whole lot. And when he arrived to the Sharks, I believe it was in January, he still kind of had to add to like, hey, I want to score. That's what I did in the AHL. That's what I've done. That's what I did before in juniors. But by the end of the season, though, he was conceding that he had to kind of go in that direction of playing a more defensive-oriented, more hard-edged game. And maybe he'll figure it out in LA. Actually, this is showing my Kings credentials here. I was thinking about the kind of player that is sort of drafted to be a certain player, and it doesn't quite work out, but he's able to remodel his game in later years. And a classic one actually is Philippe Boucher. He was drafted as a totally offensive guy right back in the day. Mm-hmm. And of course, when the Kings traded for him from the Buffalo Sabres, traded Alexei Zhitnik, and that looked like one of the worst trades in Kings history for a long time. But Philippe worked on his game in the AHL and remodeled his game into a harder edge defensive game because Philippe, even though he had a huge shot, he also was a big guy, right? He was, I believe, like 6'2", right? So he had a lot of kind of the skill set, the tool set to be a good defensive player. And he became a very good defensive player, came up with the Kings. And then in the later years, his offense came back too, as he just got more playing time. The coaches always had confidence in him defensively. So then his offensive side showed up too. And so with Studnicka's, I think, 6'2", he skates well. So the tool set is there for him to do that. I mean, I don't think he's ever going to be, I know Philippe Boucher was a defenseman. Studnicka is a center, so it's a way different kind of comparison there. I don't think he's ever going to be as good as or have that impact that Philippe Boucher did. But obviously, though, there is previous examples, a lot of examples of guys who can kind of remodel their game, guys who are big scorers at the lower levels that are able to change their game and become useful NHL players.
I'm looking at his career numbers. He's got 107 games in the NHL, only 16 points. Whereas when he plays in the AHL, he's got 5 points in 5 games, 49 points in 60 games, 7 points in 11 games, 35 points in 41 games, 7 points in 9 games, 14 points in 27 games. So he's not a point per game player at the AHL level, but obviously much more productive at that level.
Yeah, so he's going to be able to help the rein in that way. I would imagine slot in as a middle six center. But if we talk about, again, the NHL, though, like he's not going to be doing that in NHL. That's just not. I think the course has probably run on that. So if he can adjust to that, then he could still have an NHL career. I think that's kind of what you hope for. But yeah, at worst, though, you have a pretty good AHL player there.
The Kings are in an interesting spot this season because they've got 12 or 13 forwards that I think we all expect to be available and on the Kings roster, 14, depending on how the Arthur Kaliev saga unfolds. But if they experience any kind of injury or health issues, there's not a lot of obvious solutions. So guys like Gawdin, Malott, and Studnicka may find themselves called into service short-term or long-term, depending on what happens. He played 17 games with the Sharks last season. I don't mean to kick the Sharks when they're down, but the Sharks were not a very good team last year.
That's putting it very, very kindly, actually.
Can he reliably skate an NHL shift? I mean, he's got 107 games.
I think that if he's your 4C for a little bit, he won't hurt you too much. But as far as I saw, that's sort of the upper limit of what he can do. But maybe at some point again in the future, maybe I wouldn't say as soon as this year. If he's playing in your top 3 lines at AHL, then you may have a lot of injuries. You may want to make a trade, to be honest. But at a 4th line, though, yeah, he shouldn't hurt you too much, though.
How is he with the media, with the fans, with the front office staff? Like when he's not playing hockey, what's he like?
Yeah, he's good as far as I know. He's one of those guys. I think being a younger guy with not quite as much NHL experience, he's not necessarily going to be a go-to guy who's going to just shoot his mouth off, kind of, right? But yeah, he seems like a very good guy. Never heard an issue with him in the room or even dealing with him. So I think in that sense, you've got a good guy there.
And you said 2nd round pick, 53rd overall in 2017. He's 25 years old. I mean, it's a very short window that you got to see him, but did you see evolution in his game from when he arrived in San Jose?
Yeah, like I mentioned, there was a mental shift. He conceded by the end of the season. Oh, I really got to do this. When the Sharks traded for him in January and he played I think 9 games, and he honestly, and he wasn't helped by the rest of his team. The team wasn't very good. It was awful. And so he wasn't helped by that, but he wasn't necessarily standing out above that. And so they sent him down to the AHL for a little bit, and they told him that you need to do this to come back. And so he did try that. And so that kind of mental shift, if he continues that's going to help him going into next year. So I think that's really important, that evolution of saying, okay, I think for a lot of players, right? And I mentioned this with Philippe Boucher and probably a lot of players, Kings fans, and any fan of any team has seen that there's guys that are big time scorers at lower levels. And at a certain point, they need to admit that that's just not going to happen in NHL. They're not going to be Sidney Crosby at NHL level. And so they've got to refashion their game. And luckily with Studnicka, size, skating, that there are some tools to work with there.
It's interesting, even as a 2nd round pick, I don't want to say only, it's more points than I ever had, but 52 points in 64 games for the Generals in his draft year. Not numbers that leap off the page in the first place.
Yeah, he was also World Juniors, so for Team Canada too, for what it's worth too. Not so for a pretty good team. And so I think the tool set is probably there, and with the kind of, like I said, the attitude shift, that there's hope for him. There are worse guys to bet on for sure.
Sheng Peng, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Joining me now, voice of the San Diego Gulls, Aaron Cooney. How are you doing today, Aaron?
Doing well. How about you, Jesse?
I'm good. Now, if those who don't know, Aaron Cooney used to be part of the LA Kings PR staff, so this is the first time that we've ever actually had a trader back on the program. So appreciate your time today.
I feel like, traders one way, but I still have a heart for the group over there.
Sure you do.
So.
Sure you do. We're here to talk about Glen Gawdin, and one of the side effects of Cap Friendly being gone is that I no longer have a reliable source, a source that I consider to be as reliable as I considered Cap Friendly on the two-way deals that some players signed. So Glen Gawdin was signed in that round of signings that the Kings do every year, where they bring in guys who could play for the Ontario Reign. They could also play for the LA Kings. Glen Gawdin has 13 games in the NHL spread out over 4 seasons, but the last 2 years he's played for the San Diego Gulls. Last year, 70 games, 55 points. And my understanding, Aaron, is that his minor league salary this year is $500,000 compared to $775 in the NHL. So this is obviously a player the Kings were interested in bringing. I mean, they were motivating him to come sign with LA. What kind of player is Glen Gawdin based off of what you saw last season?
You're getting a point producer for sure, a guy that you can rely on, that can come in, whether it's on the power play or even 5-on-5, can create offense. And I think that was definitely one thing that San Diego and the Ducks looked at that they needed. Career year last season with 22 goals and 55 points at the AHL level. Kind of had that little bit of cup of coffee, and I think the Ducks are just kind of, as you can tell, they're still going through that rebuild and a lot of youth coming through. But for Glen Gawdin, this is a guy that can come in, and when I look at Ontario, maybe not filling in a 100-point player like a TJ Tynan, but this is a guy that can add in a couple more AHL veterans. It's going to stack up and replace some of that kind of offense and that production that may have been lost during the free agency period.
I'm glad that you referenced TJ Tynan, because that was where my mind first went to when you said a point producer. TJ Tynan didn't score a ton of goals, and yet at the AHL level, he was one of the few players that I would ever watch where he could take over a shift, especially on the power play. But Gawdin has a more even distribution between goals and assists, right?
Yeah.
He would get 70-something assists and finish with 90-something points. Is Gawdin a more traditional center point getter where he's going to score some goals but also get some assists?
Yeah, that's kind of where he's going to land. And I think, I don't see him going out and flying around the ice, as you mentioned, Tynan, from watching him the last few years, of just, that guy that picks up the drop pass to the neutral zone, backs people up, gets into the zone, and you're picking up those power play points. But Glen Gawdin is a guy that can produce, and I think for me, that's the big thing was 5-on-5 and also on the power play. And there are times that you can tell when he is on, he is on. Come back and play against some former teams. We saw him put up 5-point nights against Calgary, his old squad. When he has a chip on his shoulder, he goes out and produces. And I always like that too about him, because you can kind of see that spark. It's like, he's got it to here tonight. Look out for what's coming next. So maybe not, you're not going to get those big chunks, those kind of games. And, I'm curious to see what he can do with Ontario with maybe a little more firepower that he just didn't have. I mean, San Diego was one of the youngest teams in the league last season and didn't have kind of the maybe more established prospects as they were working in. On some nights, you had 10 first-year players in the lineup. So add him into this mix with some of the guys that could be on that Ontario squad and see what he can come up with. But he clearly has the shot. I've seen it a handful of times. I've seen his vision and his ability to make plays. And if he has to, it's going to dig pucks out of the corner and do those things. It's puck retrieval to keep a power play going, things like that. So there's a mix of kind of a lot of everything in there in the player that's just getting it on a consistent nightly basis.
He's in his late 20s. He was drafted in 2015. You mentioned all the young players on the Gulls last year. I'm assuming then that put him in the leadership group for the Gulls last season.
Absolutely. There was kind of a mixed rotation of alternates. Chase DeLeo, that was the captain last season for the Gulls and missed a lot of time with injury from stepping back from training camp in a preseason game against the Kings. Took a knee-on-knee hit from Arthur Kalios. So left him out, and filling in that void, he stepped right into that alternate captain realm for the Gulls. So, and I think that's a big part of what they wanted. You had this guy that you saw him kind of rise through the ranks, starting in junior, taking over as a leader, Swift Current as a captain. I think he took that team to the Memorial Cup, winning the Western League, and as an overager, second in scoring that season as their captain, and kind of cruised along. And now wearing an A with the Gulls, and wanted to be that kind of mentor. They have some other young centers that they really wanted that kind of mentoring from. And between him, DeLeo, and Andrew Agazzino, it was working with guys like Nathan Gaucher, another one of those centers, and Josh Lapina, and some of these other young prospects, especially down the middle, that need to learn that pro game and also learn how to be a pro away from the ice. So I think that was a big part of it for bringing in some of these guys for San Diego over the last couple of years. It's why I got a 2-year contract, knowing that there was going to be this youth movement coming through. As you draft these prospects, were starting to make their turn to professional hockey, and he definitely filled that void. And for Ontario, losing a guy like Tyne, another veteran in another leadership role, it kind of fills that leadership side as well, just going, a couple hours up north.
We mentioned he's only played, 13 games, I think I said, in the NHL, spread out over 4 seasons. But he's part of a group of players the Kings brought in this offseason: Jeff Malott, Jack Studnicka, and Glen Gawdin, all mid to late 20s, all forwards. If for whatever reason, injuries or, roster decisions not working out for the LA Kings, is this a guy that you would trust putting in an NHL lineup for a short stretch of games, or maybe even a long stretch of games?
I would, knowing him a little personally, I would love to see him get a long stretch of games and see what he can really do. Because if you look here and there through his career, whether it's Calgary or with Anaheim, it is just a short, like, hey, need a body game or two, and then kind of going right back down. I would be really interested to see what Glen Gawdin would look like at the NHL level at an extended tour of duty if he had a little more time. Able to settle in and really get his feet underneath him in a kind of role. But throughout his career, yeah, you're right, 13 NHL games. He's only had 1 assist at that level. And I think it's just too small of a sample size to really know what's he capable of. But he's right there, that late 20s, still a couple years away from 30s. That's kind of your prime. This is where you kind of make or break for you. So I'm sure this could lead to an opportunity for him to go out there, try and grasp it, should that come for the LA Kings, and really show what he's capable of. Because if you look even at his junior career, just that kind of progression every year has gotten better and better and better from Swift Current, WHL, and then slowly here along in his AHL career. I'm sure you got to deal with COVID, and I think that kind of interrupted a lot of growth for prospects and players, just losing that kind of time. But you keep going down the line through his stats. Every single year has pretty much gotten better.
I've got him penciled in at top 6 forward. I've got him penciled into top line for the Ontario Reign. It doesn't mean anything. There's still Kings training camp, Reign training camp, preseason, all that to go. And then even then, the lines don't necessarily stay the same night to night. But he'll definitely be given an opportunity in Ontario. Like I said, he and Malott and Studnicka brought in specifically to fill roles. What's he like in the locker room, away from the ice? You mentioned that you know him personally. You hope that he'll get a chance. What's he like, with the press, fans, doing things that the organization asked him to go out and do?
He's a professional in all those realms. Now he's one of the quieter guys, just in my dealings with him in terms of interviews, and even just talking to him on the side, like, hey, you got to do this. And it's always, there's never that kind of pushback or something. He's understands that this comes along with being a professional and being in the league and in the spotlight, and he steps in, whether it's and jumps into those fan events, community events, whatever's kind of asked of him, is always there and fills that role well, especially when you're wearing an A or in that kind of leadership group. So, I would say, couldn't tell you exactly what a locker room speech or anything like that would be like, but in my dealings with him, he's been an utmost professional. And, for me, like I told you before, I'm hoping he can kind of get that opportunity at the NHL level and really see what he can do.
Well, ultimate professional makes him sound a lot like you, Aaron. We appreciate you joining me here today.
I do my best.
Miss you around the offices at El Segundo, but happy for you and your opportunities there in San Diego.
I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to catching up with everybody here soon at the rookie tournament that you guys will be hosting.
Joining me today, Daniel Fink, hockey communications and broadcaster for the Manitoba Moose. How are you doing today, Daniel?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
So we're here to talk about Jeff Malott, and I guess my first question is that how you pronounce his name?
Yes, absolutely. Nailed it first try. So you're ahead of about half the game.
So we have Jeannot and Deneau now. And there was some question as to whether or not it was Malot or Malott.
No, it's just the straight up, pretty much just say it how it looks. So,
all right. In that case, are we going to like him Malott?
I think you will.
Right.
Jeff is a heck of a hockey player, and off the ice, he's a lot of fun too. So I think he's going to fit in very well, and certainly has been great to have him here in Manitoba for the past few seasons.
What kind of player? Like if you were building an EA NHL 25 team and you had to designate him a certain class, like what type of player would you elevate or pitch him as?
Jeff Malott is your prototypical power forward. He is a guy that can protect the puck at a very high level down low. He can control the pace of play below the goal line. He's going to finish in around the net. He's going to score a bunch of goals from about that 6-foot area out in front of the goal. But then he's actually got a pretty wicked shot and a decent set of hands too. If he can break away and get in on goaltenders alone, he's pretty lethal in that regard too. I mean, he was one of the top overtime goal scorers for the Moose in his time with Manitoba. So there's a good set of hands there too.
It's his profile says he's 6'5". Is he the type of player that can use his size effectively, or is he the type of player that just happens to be huge?
He's not a guy that's going to go running around the ice looking to blow guys up. But what he does very effectively is uses that frame to his advantage. So he'll be in physical battles. He can drop the gloves if needed, things like that. He's not going to try and line a guy up at center ice all too often. But what he does is once he gets that puck in against the boards, in and around the net, it is very difficult to get that puck away from him. He protects it so well. He uses his wide base, those long legs and that powerful frame to stay on top of the puck and just really prevents any sort of ability for defenders unless they really go to town to try and get away from him, which opens up opportunities for his line mates.
Now I'm looking at his hockey DB page, and I'm seeing that he's got one NHL game to his name. Excuse me. I think it was assumed by most people when he was acquired that he'd be playing on the Ontario Reign. The Reign roster this year is going to be a bit of a question mark for me. I'm not really sure who's going to be in the top 6. Is he? I mean, I see that he's scoring 20 goals a year. He strikes me as a top 6 type player.
Absolutely. I mean, he rode shotgun with Brad Lambert, who's a top prospect for the Winnipeg Jets, and was really looked at to be that veteran presence for a very young centerman, to be with him the whole season and provide that level of finish, confidence, and a little bit of protection physically, if you will, to create that space for Brad. So he's a guy that's really been in the top 6 for the Moose really since I guess he kind of started out on the fourth line his first few games at the Moose back in that COVID bubble season, worked his way up pretty quickly, led the team in goals the next couple of seasons, and then has been right on the cusp of doing that the past few. So he's definitely a guy that has operated in the top 6 for the Moose. And when you start to look at his production over the past number of years, he's one of the top goal scorers, one of the most consistent goal scorers in the American Hockey League since he joined the league.
Is he scoring more from in close or from distance?
He's definitely going to score a lot of those goals from about 10 feet from the net. He's going to find loose pucks. He's going to settle them down. He's going to get them past goaltenders. He's going to knock them in. He's going to tip them in. But he does have a very heavy wrist shot that he can use to score from distance. And it's a lot of fun when he's able to line that up and wire it past a goalie.
Now, you mentioned that he's a lot of fun off the ice. What kind of personality does he have when you're interacting with him?
He's a very kind, generous person. He's great in the community. And you know what? He has been our go-to guy for when it comes to content, things like that. We leaned on him heavily for this year's Christmas video. I highly recommend checking it out. It's beginning to look Malott like Christmas, on YouTube.
Right.
Yeah. So he's a bit of an actor too. He's just a lot of fun off the ice. And I suspect that, Kings and Rain fan will start to see him pop up in their content throughout. But definitely a lot of fun off the ice.
How is he with adversity?
You know what? This Moose team this season went through a lot of adversity. We had an 11-game losing streak, things like that. And a lot of players hadn't been through something like that. A lot of these guys, especially as they're developing, are on very good teams and a little bit of a struggle. But you know what? He was part of a group that battled through that and eventually helped the Moose to gain the playoff spots in the Calder Cup playoffs. So definitely good at battling through it. He's been through some stretches where maybe goals haven't been falling for him. That can kind of happen, especially when you're one of those guys that has to fight for pucks in front of the net. All of a sudden they're bouncing left instead of right, things like that. And he just puts his head down and keeps working. He's a guy that is definitely very consistent. He's passionate about the game, but he doesn't let that get in the way. So he's definitely a guy that can fight through that adversity and come out on top. I
was a little bit surprised at the structure of his contract, and as long as we have cap friendly still available to us at the time of this recording, I'm just dreading the day that it just disappears. He's basically got a one-way deal in his first year and a two-way deal in his second year, but it pays $425,000 in minor salary. Is he that solid an AHL performer that they're willing to give him that much money to come here and presumably play for the Ontario Reign?
Well, it's very exciting to see him get that opportunity with that one-way contract and what that can sometimes mean. I mean, here's a guy that, again, when you're looking at a player that scores in that 22 to 25 goal range consistently, you're looking at a top player in the American Hockey League. And I believe it was at one point this season he had scored, I don't have the stat right in front of me anymore. It hasn't been completely updated, but he had scored like the 5th most goals in the American Hockey League since joining the league. So he's not necessarily a guy like that we've seen, like Martin Frk would be a really good example, who necessarily puts up 30 in a season. But Jeff has just been like clockwork on a 20-plus goal pace ever since he joined the league, and that's incredibly valuable. That kind of consistency is sometimes very tough to find in the American Hockey League. So you're looking at a guy that can be relied on to produce.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at his stats now. He had 14 goals in 34 games in 2021, 23 goals 3 years ago, 23 goals 2 years ago, and 22 goals last year. So it seems like he's a lock for at least 22.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's a guy that if you start diving deeper into those stats, scored a lot of power play goals his previous few seasons. It was looked at this season to kind of set up a few more power play goals. So that goal total could have even been higher if perhaps he was bagging a few more power play goals along the line. So it's, again, that consistency is just so valuable, especially in American Hockey League where development and you're going through players kind of finding their way. And as we all know, the difference between AHL and NHL players a lot of time is that consistency. So it's what you look for in those guys that are those depth forwards and knocking right on the door.
Now, he is 27 years old. He'll be 28 by the time the season starts. He spent 4 years at Cornell. Is he part of the leadership group? I'm sorry, I don't know who the letter wearers were last year for the Moose, but is he part of that group?
Yeah, absolutely. He wasn't necessarily one of the guys that wore the letters, but he's been a big part of the overarching leadership for the Moose really since he arrived. I mean, that the COVID bubble season, as I'm sure everyone has their own stories about that and the way teams came together, but he was part of a really tight crew that came together that season and played together for a few years. It's kind of dispersing now, as is the nature of the American Hockey League. But that group really drove a culture for the Moose that helped them become a winning team and finish in the top 3 of the division for 3 straight years, whichever division they were playing in at the time, and helped them to really foster a strong culture in the room of inclusivity. Everybody always talks about joining the Moose room, about how everybody was so welcoming, and he was a big part of that. And so when you talk about leadership, there's all sorts of different forms of it, but the culture that Jeff and some of his teammates were able to build for this AHL club has been so important for the development of young prospects.
And now I don't want to dwell on this too much, but I'm looking at his penalty minutes, and penalty minutes are a funny thing because obviously the age of the goon is essentially over. So guys that are getting 300, 400 penalty minutes is not really a thing. He doesn't have a ton of penalty minutes, but he's got more than no penalty minutes. So how much of that is, he's got 66 in 70 games last year, 82 in 71 games the year before that, 55 in 62 the year before that, 35 penalty minutes in 34 games in his first year. Where are those penalty minutes coming from primarily?
Yeah, I mean, he's not adverse to dropping the gloves. I mean, he'll get into a few fights a season, so that'll rack him up pretty quickly and account for a good chunk of that. And he's in the mix consistently. So those penalty minutes are gonna find their way sometimes to bigger forwards who might win some battles against smaller forwards and end up in the box for being too strong. But it's not like you're looking at an undisciplined player here by any stretch of the imagination. But if you're looking for someone to really throw him. His brother Mike is actually a fighter in the UFC, so that's more the guy that you're looking for if you want to see the guy to really chuck some bombs.
That's good background information. I appreciate that.
Figured I'd slip that one in there.
No, thank you. All right, well, Daniel, I appreciate your time very much, and we look forward to seeing Jeff out there on the ice. And enjoy the rest of your summer.
Well, thanks for having me on. And again, I think fans are really going to enjoy a lot watching Jeff Malott. He's a lot of fun on the ice and just as much off it.